and the slide is in order, so I guess we can start now. All right, so last time we started the lecture on life cycle systems thinking. Okay, and as promised, today we're going to continue our discussion on life cycle and systems thinking. So for this, I'm going to talk about extended producer responsibility, which I think is a good example of policy application of life cycle thinking, life cycle and systems thinking. And then we're going to briefly talk about a landmark use of LCA in energy policy and other examples. Okay, so let's look at HB 9147. Okay, HB 9147 is actually a bill that is in the process of being passed in Congress, and there's a parallel bill right now in the Senate that is in tune with the idea of enhanced producer responsibility. So HB 9147 is an act regulating the production, importation, sale, distribution, provision, use, recovery, collection, recycling, and disposal of single-use plastic products. So from the title, you would think that this is focused only on single-use plastic products. But I decided to include this in our discussions because the framework behind it, at least part of it, is actually related to enhance producer responsibility. And as you can see from the title, it goes through all the different life cycle stages, okay, of at least in this case, single-use plastic products. So it's actually an application of life cycle thinking in formulating policies. And fortunately, this one is in the context of the Philippines, okay? Because in most examples, at least for life cycle analysis, the context is usually outside the Philippines, no? Okay, so let's look at this particular provision. Letter G, plastic footprint refers to the total amount of plastic or composite materials used in the production, distribution, promotion, and sale of single-use plastic products or services. Okay, so in this policy, it is actually spelled out what plastic footprint means, and you've probably heard about carbon footprint, energy footprint, etc. Those ideas make use of the concept of life cycle thinking. Although you could argue that for this is only partial life cycle, no, because you start with production, etc. You should also take into consideration the upstream stages, but at least it captures a big portion of the life cycle. Okay, so that's a concept used in the law. Well, the proposed law. And then here you have in J, single-use plastic products refer to plastic products designed to be disposed, destroyed, or recycled after only one use. Okay, and the idea of the bill is to phase out these single-use plastic products. Okay, and you can see here the following non-compostable single-use plastic products shall be phased out within a period of 4 years from the effectivity of this act. So ang dami nang covered. Okay, so you have plates and saucers, cups, bowls, and lids, cutlery like spoons, forks, knives, and chopsticks. So mukhang there will be a market for other products, alternative products such as yung bamboo products that are becoming a trend in the market right now. Food and beverage containers made of expanded polystyrene, oxidogradable plastics, film wrap, packaging or bags of less than 50 microns in thickness, and sachets and pouches that are multi-layered with other materials. Okay. Okay. So, yun yung main idea nung law na ito. But in addition to that, it goes on to touch on the idea of extended producer responsibility. But what is extended producer responsibility? Okay. So here you can see a diagram, okay, of EPR, okay, and EPR as a waste management tool relies on the idea that waste reduction and management should be designed into a product. Okay, the design of a product and product systems has biggest influence in how environmentally sound a product could be. So if you remember, our product life cycle that we looked into last time actually starts with R&D, conceptualization, and conservation of resources, reduction of the use and generation of toxic and hazardous materials, minimization of energy use, and the reduction of the quantity of wastes for disposal are objectives that are or should be taken into consideration right at the design phase. And with this, we can say that the producer, okay, because it's the producer who has most power to influence this, is in the best position to achieve these objectives because it is a producer who has influence over product and system design. Okay, so here you can see that basically EPR wants design and the design and the production of environmentally sound products. So it hinges on this principle, no? And this means conservation of raw materials. Okay, so part of the design should take into consideration conservation of resources, reduce the use and generation of toxic and hazardous materials, reduce energy use, and then reduce the quantity of waste for final disposal. Okay. Again, we review. These are the different life cycle stages. And the governing principle of EPR is that the producer is responsible in minimizing the environmental footprint of a product throughout its life cycle. So EPR directs the producer towards life cycle and systems thinking in designing its products in order to minimize the product's negative impacts to the environment, which in this diagram, we refer collectively to as waste. Now, here you can see the general phases in a product life cycle, as we've shown in the previous meeting. We start with R&D and then to the actualization of the product, which includes the succeeding stages. No, it is desired that as part of waste management, products are, of course, reused, remanufactured, or recycled. Now, the idea of EPR is to encourage producers to look through its product's life cycle and minimize the product environmental footprint over this life cycle. Okay, therefore, the producers are responsible for the choice of raw materials, for the impacts of manufacturing processes on the environment, impacts of product transportation, the impacts of product use, and of course, of its disposal. However, in the status quo, the cost of waste management is largely shouldered by the local government units. Therefore, there is little to no incentive for producers to minimize the waste and damage that their products might inflict on the environment, as you can see here, no? So that's the status quo. It's the LGU that takes care of this. And by cost shouldered by LGU, what we actually mean is cost is shouldered by the taxpayers. Okay, now with EPR, the idea is to have the producers shoulder this cost, as it is the decision of the producer in designing and producing its products that mostly determines the environmental damage and waste brought about by the product. So this is actually an embodiment of the polluter pays principle. Okay. Now, so with EPR, the cost is now shouldered by the producer. Okay. However, okay. Okay, so before we go to that idea, producers are encouraged to prevent the waste generation, as you can see with the arrow pointing downwards. Reduce the use of potentially toxic inputs. Design products that are easily recyclable. Okay, so increase natin yung remanufacture, reuse, and recycle. Okay, they are expected to internalize the cost of waste management into their product prices. So what do we mean by that? This means that the production of their products have an unintended negative consequence, diba, to the environment in the form of waste. And this has its corresponding cost. Now, this cost must be included in the determination of the price of the product. Hence the word internalization of the cost. No? Now, therefore, although we say that the producer shoulders the cost, okay, of more environmentally products, okay, so that's the idea of EPR, right? Polluter pays principle. We have to bear in mind that this cost is eventually passed on to the consumers, okay? So assuming that we are operating under a free market, consumers can provide price signals, and this can push producers to eventually minimize the cost of making their products more environmentally sound. So ito yung idea ng EPR. So then, even though the parang how to operationalize it is that the producer sort of shoulders first the cost, okay? Eventually naman napapasa sa consumers. But then the consumers will of course choose the least expensive product. So then the producers will be encouraged to design their products in an environmentally sound way, but also minimizing their costs so that they will be preferred by the consumers. Okay. Now EPR, okay, can have several decision-making drivers. Okay, you can have sustainable development being part of the effort towards sustainable development as a decision-making driver, product policy, okay, or waste management. In the case of the bills being passed right now in the Philippines, it's mostly waste management, which is the decision-making driver for the adoption of EPR as a framework. No? Okay. And in several countries that have already embraced EPR, okay, as a decision-making driver in their own countries, no, in most of these countries, waste management is the driver. Okay, and for these countries, it's usually the case that there are specific percentages of post-consumer materials to be recycled or diverted from final disposal. And then there is government support for research and development, as well as commercialization activities for materials recovery technologies and capabilities. Okay. And even though we say that the cost should be internalized by the producers, and they have the responsibility to actually take back the waste that they put into the to the market. Okay, the LGUs are still largely responsible. No, for example, LGUs continue to be involved in managing municipal waste. And of course, they can provide a very useful feedback loop on the effectiveness of the enhanced producer responsibility implementation. And of course, the national authorities, okay, can support purchasing policies in favor of products containing recycled materials. And of course, support R&D and commercialization of technologies and systems that are required to process secondary materials. Okay, and of course, you can furthermore you can use LCA, to evaluate, okay, the impact of these efforts by the LGU and the national authorities, as well as the implementation of EPR itself. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm also showing you this and the particular sections in the law. What could be the effect, okay, for example, of banning these single-use plastics, and moving to other alternatives. Okay, that could be an interesting topic. Okay, I would like to add several more things about EPR. So, for example, common characteristics of EPR implementation in other countries. The governments usually mandate a reduction and or recycling targets. So reduction of use of, for example, single-use plastics, or increase in the recycling targets of materials. No, in most cases, it's packaging. And then there is a presence of an industry exemption scheme, or the option for producers to transfer their individual responsibilities to a collective industry entity. This basically means, okay, so under EPR, policies related to EPR, usually the case is, well, the producers are mandated to take back their packaging and then recycle it, etc. But in some cases, in a lot of cases, the producers don't have their individual capability to do that. Okay, so it can become too expensive for them to do that. So what happens is, a group of producers could form an organization that will do this for them, so that they can be exempted from the scheme of taking back their own waste. And then it's that central organization that will perform their responsibility for them. And this is usually called the producer responsibility organization in other countries. No, and this is actually, if you look at HB 9147, this is part of the law, that there should be a PRO that will be formed. Okay. Another common characteristic is that other government goals are included. So, for example, market share for reusable products. Okay. There is a statement on market share for reusable products, or counting energy recovery toward achievement of recycling targets. So this is another reason why I'm also presenting this to the class, because part of the class, or half of the class, are taking energy engineering. Okay, this is still relevant to you kasi in other countries, actually, energy recovery can be counted towards recycling targets. Okay, so maybe you could also become interested in looking at the life cycle analysis with respect to this one. Okay, and you can actually extend it to become a thesis topic. Okay, and these are just several activities by different actors in support of EPR goals, and you can go through them later on. Okay, but now I would like to move on to the German solution to its packaging waste problem. Okay, so in Germany, way back in the 90s, early 90s, they had a very big problem. Okay, that is packaging made up about 50% by volume and 30% by weight of their municipal solid waste. Okay, so what they came up with as a solution is the packaging ordinance, which entered into force on the 12th of June, 1991. Okay, and under this, retailers and producers were mandated to take back a fixed and yearly increasing percentage of packaging materials and to recycle them in accordance with the principles laid down in the ordinance. Okay. So the goals of their ordinance included packaging is to be produced from materials that are environmentally acceptable and do not hinder recycling. Oh, so naisip na, no? So meron pa ring component ng life cycle thinking that is being encouraged among the producers. So they are already made to think in such a way that they have to consider the future implications of their packaging products on, well, for example, recyclability. Okay, so waste management, the stage for waste management. And then second, waste from packaging is to be avoided. Oh, so of course, that's the better way. No? If that packaging is reduced to that volume and weight necessary to protect the contents and to market the product, is so produced as to be refillable insofar as it is technically possible and feasible and is recycled when refill is not possible. Okay, so it's encouraging producers to think of the end of life of their products. And these are recent targets, by the way. The packaging ordinance already developed into a law in itself. So that day, it was just subsumed under a bigger law. Okay, and now since the problem still persists, and to some extent the market related to that particular ordinance actually grew, which is a good thing for the environment. Ibig sabihin, dumami yung recyclers nila, tumaas yung recycling rate nila. Okay, they needed a better set of guidelines, okay, for implementation of the scheme. So it became a packaging law, Verpack non Gesetz is what they call it. And with this, they now have new targets. Okay, and as you can see, the numbers are really high. Okay. And of course, you might be wondering, no? Kasi complex yung supply chain. Who is to be considered a producer? Well, in the German example, ito yung kanilang definition. Manufacturer, okay, so manufacturer ang general term in the new law. Manufacturing in the sense of the act is every distributor who is the first to professionally circulate the packaging in Germany or who imports it to the German market. And as you can see here, online retailers are also included. Any commercial retailer, also online retailer, is subject to the obligation to participate in the system. So I think this is, as I said, it's a good example of the adoption of life cycle and systems thinking in terms of policy crafting and implementation. Okay. Let's move on to lecture 2, which is quantitative and qualitative methods supporting LCA.